Greetings, friends. My name is Pavel Stelmach, and now we will dive into the top news of this day. The last service of the Russian Church in Pechersk Lavra. Today ends the lease of the Holy Dormitor Monastery by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, so they must leave the territory of the Kyiv Pechersk Lavra. As Alexei Danilov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, said, the Moscow Church in the Kyiv Pechersk Lavra will not be, but no one is going to pull anyone by the legs. According to him, the hierarchs of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate declared that they allegedly had no relation to Moscow, but at the same time, Moscow priest Kirill Gundyaev told us how to live here.
We cannot follow their lead and not understand that this is a huge danger for our country. We will solve the issue in a legal way, but they will not be in the Lavra. The laws of Ukraine will be respected by everyone without exception, and laws will be obeyed. Alexei Danilov, Secretary of the National Security Council of Ukraine, in an interview with Radio NV.
Already today, representatives of the Kyiv Pechersk Lavra announced that they will legislate the termination of the lease accountment in court. The UOC of the Moscow Patriarchate reported that the lawsuit has already been filed. The leadership of the Moscow Patriarchate made it clear even earlier that it was not going to leave and threatened an apocalypse. However, what can we talk about if massive cases of collaboration and some hierarchs and clerics of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate were discovered, especially in the war zone? Therefore, the Ukrainian authorities and Ukrainian society should simply explain that the decision on the laurel should be carried out calmly and not give a chance to create a picture for propagandists of the Russian Federation. After all, the Russian mass media know how to make a picture. Already today, several hundred people came to the walls of the Lavra. Some of them declared that they would not leave the territory of the complex.
Numerous appeals are received from all corners of our country to the metropolis that believers are ready to protect their shrine.
But I have a question for the churchmen. From which country do the appeals come? It is not from the Russian swarms. It is not from inside of the Kremlin walls. After all, representatives of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate have repeatedly said that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is non-canonical. But we received the Thomas from the Patriarch Bartholomew. So what is non-canonical? The fact that Moscow can no longer influence Ukrainian church and spread its narratives through priests. A church whose head is a citizen of an aggressor country who once worked for the KGB cannot work in our country. And the largest laurel of the country cannot be subordinated to this church.
It should be noted that the Lavra always belonged to the throne of the Metropolitan of Kyiv, who by tradition was already the abbot of the Lavra. Therefore, today, when we say that the blessed Epiphany heads the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, he is according to the old tradition and, in fact, the man who heads the Kyiv Pechersk Lavra according to the tradition of our Ukrainian church.
Someone can say that Ukraine is a secular state and the government should not influence religious life. But since November, representatives of the Security Service of Ukraine conducted about 100 searches of Moscow Patriarchate churches. They found pro-Russian literature, correspondence with curators from Moscow, St. George tapes, Russian passports. More than 20 people were suspected. 5 priests have already been convicted of collaborationism. So should the state turn a blind eye to the work of possible traitors who are ready to cooperate with the occupier? I think this is a rhetorical question. But it is the Russians who are destroying the Ukrainian religion, and it is not only about Christianity. At least 494 religious buildings in Ukraine were destroyed, damaged or looted due to the Russian invasion. All religions and denominations were affected, including churches, mosques, synagogues, educational and administrative buildings of religious committees in Ukraine. The most significant number of religious premises were destroyed in the occupied Donetsk region, at least 120, and Luhansk region, over 70. The scale of destruction was also significant in the Kyiv region, 70 buildings as well as in the Kherson region and Kharkiv regions. In each, more than 50 religious buildings were destroyed. Religious sites were affected everywhere throughout Ukraine, from Kherson in the south to Chernihiv in the north. Russian airstrikes on civilian targets affected almost all regions of Ukraine and continue to do this every day. So to say that we are destroying religion is simply nonsense. But there are the Russians. They cannot do otherwise. In an interview with Российская Gazeta, the Secretary of the Security Council of Russia, Patrushev, stated that Russia has always protected the sovereignty of other nations and even saved the United States from disintegration. Do not ask when and under what conditions. They themselves do not know this, although they can invent many things. For example, that Alaska was specially sold to support the USA with gold at Klondike Gold Rush. The fact that 30 years have passed between these events will not concern anyone. The main thing is to talk about it confidentially. However, what really remained in Russia from the 19th century is sinking in outdated categories of colonialism. From the point of view of the Russian leadership, a truly sovereign state is one that is able and practices restrictions on the rights of its own citizens, interferes in the internal affairs of other countries, and is capable of economic self-isolation. It is this kind of sovereignty that it seeks for Russia. But this was not enough. It was not for nothing that the Kremlin repeatedly sounded phrases about taking into account Russian interests in Europe.
If you mean, let's say, a war in a wide context, this is a confrontation with hostile states, with unfriendly countries, this is a hybrid war that they unleashed against our country, then this is for a long time. And here we need firmness, self-confidence, purposefulness and unity around the president. Dmitry Peskov, press secretary for Vladimir Putin.
If you look back at least 2 centuries, you can see a fairly clear picture. The territory of Russia was constantly growing due to aggression and enslavement of its neighbors. Russia has almost always been an authoritarian despotism, where people were treated as expendable material, not caring at all about their standard of living. All the time, in addition to natural resources, Russia successfully exported wars and revolutions. Even the Second World War, with victory over fascism, ended as an opportunity for Russia to subjugate a large part of Europe. The idea that the West has historically tried to destroy Russia is a conspiratorial delusion that stems from excessive self-centeredness and an inferiority complex. Claims that Russia saved the USA from collapse, with 2 examples from the end of the 18th and mid-19th centuries, and ridiculous, are wrong. On the contrary, it was the USA that regularly saved the Russian Empire, the USSR, and then the Russian Federation from starvation and political collapse. Therefore, there are some tips for the world community from a former operative of the CIA, and today a professor at Georgetown University, Douglas, London, published in the Wall Street Journal. Do not believe Putin's threats. He will not withstand the war of attrition in Ukraine. The longer the war lasts, the worse it is for Moscow. His best bet is to mask his weakness and scare his enemies into giving in first. Time gives Ukraine the opportunity to deploy modern weapons on the march and bring back freshly trained Ukrainian operators from the West. More time makes it possible to improve the productivity of the arms supply chains that the United States is building. Put it all together and Ukraine has almost everything it needs for a much anticipated offensive. Putin can fight back against those forces, but putting everything on the front line would be an extremely risky venture for him. If Ukraine wins, will he be able to survive after Crimea is lost to Russia and his troops are harshly pushed across the Russian border? He's probably most afraid if the USA and his allies press the gas. Pressure on the Russian leader is not without risk, but respecting his behavior will rather weaken the West's resolve and exacerbate the conflict. The International Atomic Energy Agency mission arrived at the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhya NPP. This is the 2nd visit during its occupation by the Russians. As reported in the press service of the national nuclear energy generating company Energatom, this time Grossi plans to see how the situation at the ZNPP has changed, to talk with the nuclear workers who operate it, and also to act as a guarantor of the rotation of members of the agency's permanent mission, which has been working at the Zaporizhzhya NPP since September 2022. Russian occupiers delayed rotation for almost a month, Moreover, Russia continues its nuclear blackmail by occupying the Zaporizhzhya nuclear power plant and using it as a military base. Ukraine calls for sanctions against the Russian nuclear company Rosatom. The occupiers have violated the rules of operation for a nuclear facility by shelling the ZNPP's infrastructure, holding hostages, and torturing Ukrainian personnel. We urge our allies to immediately sanction Rosatom. Russia must withdraw its military and civilian personnel from the ZNPP, release its workers, and hand over control to Ukraine. In President Zelensky's peace formula, nuclear safety is a fundamental and immutable condition. The UN Security Council voted unanimously in favor of it.
Жоден інший терорист
No other terrorist has reached such depth in the cynicism in which Russia constantly seeks and finds a new bottom. Holding a nuclear power plant hostage for more than a year is the worst thing that could happen in the history of the European and in general global nuclear energy sector. The longer the Russian occupation of the ZNPP continues, the greater will be the threat to the security of Ukraine, the whole of Europe and the world.
All the same, I hope that the Russian military will leave the Zaporizhzhya NPP, and if not voluntarily, then under pressure from the defense forces of Ukraine. I am sure that none of our projectiles will fly in the direction of the reactors, but I am even more sure that our military leadership will find a way to drive out the Russians out of there. Moreover, I will make an assumption that the maintenance of the ZNPP was another level of pressure on our energy system during the autumn-winter missile tests. But our energy workers, our heroes, did the impossible and kept the country from blackouts. And it will be easier in the summer, especially with the support of our European partners.
Reconfirmed our unwavering support to Ukraine, and also we discussed concrete ways to continue showing our solidarity in the coming months. And just this morning, ENTSO-E has decided to further increase the import capacity from Ukraine to 850 megawatts from current 700. So this is just one step, but clearly this is a progress. And I also informed ministers about the plan to deliver solar panels to Ukraine to ensure that there is electricity supply for hospitals and other civilian infrastructure, even if temporarily Russia has managed to destroy some grid connections. And I also expressed my concern for the situation around Zaporizhzhya nuclear power plant and Russia's continued lack of respect for international nuclear safety conventions and rules.
So now it's worth waiting for the Russians to leave the station, as they did before in Chernobyl, because the station itself is almost an atomic bomb, at least dirty, so it cannot carry any load from a military point of view, but it can be used as an object of blackmail. So we are waiting for new statements from the Kremlin. That concludes our today's video. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for future videos. Goodbye.